You have a prediction. You've essentially predicted that there will be a coup if Donald Trump wins before the certification of the electoral votes in January of 2025. Detail what your prediction is and why you think that this will happen.
Well, my prediction is they're going to try it. Whether it works or not, I think will depend on what the mandate is, what the cushion is effectively between. So let's just start with the dates. So we have, November 5th, we've got the vote. January 6th, we have the certification of the vote. Now, there's a group that are calling themselves the State Democracy Defenders. This is Norm Eisen, the legal hatchet man for all of this, the guy who drafted 10 articles of impeachment for Trump, his first year in office, the guy who led Crew, which sued the Trump administration thousands of times, the guy who led the Trump impeachment process, the guy who led Russiagate, the guy who led the indictments. This is the sort of legal hatchet man for all things killed Trump. He's teamed up with Jamie Raskin, who is the U.S. congressman who led the charge on everything from the January 6th, all of the sort of hoax lawfare that went on around that. But Jamie Raskin has said publicly that it doesn't matter who people vote for in November. Doesn't matter. Trump can win 350 electoral votes. It doesn't matter because Congress, under Raskin's initiative, is going to not certify a Trump electoral college victory because they will cancel out the electoral college votes. They'll nullify Donald Trump at the 11th hour, 2 weeks before inauguration on January 6, 2025, by citing Article 3 of the 14th Amendment to argue that Trump is an insurrectionist, and so he's therefore disqualified from holding office. And what he predicted is at that point, it's going to piss off. And now he said we shouldn't have had to do this because the Supreme Court, when the ball was in their court several months ago, during the immunity ruling verdict that came down, they should have held that Trump was an insurrectionist then, and then he would have been disqualified already under the 14th Amendment. But he said because the Supreme Court failed to disqualify him, we'll simply make that determination through Congress. But we know that when we do that, the country is going to erupt in what he called civil war conditions. He basically predicted that, Trump militias and paramilitaries and angry street mobs would take to the streets and would try to basically, have some show of outrage or get Trump into office despite Congress nullifying the Electoral College victory. And he said at that point, we're going to need martial law conditions. We're going to need the U.S. military to effectively disperse all of these crowds. And we're going to have to, fight against MAGA supporters the same way the military fights against an insurgency force. We're going to need a sort of military counterinsurgency state, which will be imposed across the country, just as they, did around January 6, 2017, when the military, turned D.C. into effectively a military occupied territory. And, anyone who was there, who lived through January 2017, knows what that feels like. There are men with assault rifles. There are large military Humvees on every street corner. There's barbed wire. There's smoke in the air. The whole thing feels like, like you don't even want to, put a Post-it note on the wall that says what your political beliefs are, because, you feel what people in Baghdad or people in Fallujah surely felt when the U.S. military came there. If you're on the wrong side of the U.S. installed regime, then you're staring at the barrel of the gun that that is now going to do this sort of martial law period until the insurgency is quelled, and then they can return to a Justice Department run legal system. Now it totally depends, I think, on how things go down next week, because if Trump wins a massive electoral college victory, if he gets 300 electoral votes, this is going to be much harder to do because you're going to have 2 months of narrative setting about the size of the mandate. And this apparatus that is doing this is a blob apparatus. It's a foreign policy establishment because they hate Trump's foreign policy on Eurasia, because they have trillions of dollars on the line between Goldman and JP Morgan and BlackRock and that whole financial corporate world that sponsors the Biden-Harris world. And so they want Trump to be they want to avoid Trump becoming president and stop him because he could undermine this very fragile, very lucrative in-process operation to acquire all that if he decides to be neutral with Russia as opposed to maximum pressure. So what the issue is, though, if they just completely strong arm this and do it ham-fistedly, the international blowback could be tremendous. Other countries around the world are going to be watching the daily ups and downs of the next 2 months. And our entire linchpin of statecraft is based on democracy promotion. Already, I think the State Department's democracy promotion apparatus has been weakened by the questions around the legitimacy of the 2020 election. We saw, Bukele in El Salvador question them. We saw Bolsonaro in Brazil question them. We saw, Orban in Hungary question them. We saw even questions from Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage in Western Europe. Things are already on edge about the legitimacy of the U.S. election process, and that damages our ability to translate our democracy promotion programs into effective statecraft when other people think that our system is not legitimate. So what they're going to do is they're going to need to see the narrative on this. And this is why you saw these letters to Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson and Steven Crowder and all these folks warning them not to delegitimize a potential, Kamala Harris win under shady circumstances next week or in January, you name it, because they'll be demonetized if they do. You'll be removed from the YouTube partner program. This is what they did last time in 2020. They ran something called the Transition Integrity Project, where they worked with all the legacy news outlets, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox. They literally had a delegation sent to all of them. They gave them all the talking points. They got written commitments about the exact terms they would use to cover the election process and the various contingent outcomes. Trump wins on election day. Trump wins on election day, but then loses to Joe Biden, the so-called red mirage, blue shift. So they are surely running that program back in the background while simultaneously working with the social media companies to try to ensure that they can get control over perceptions of legitimacy, because perceptions of legitimacy will determine how many pieces they can deploy on the chessboard to orchestrate a potential coup.
Well, that brings me to election integrity. We're obviously less than a week before the election, and we have examples from Virginia. We have examples from Michigan. We have examples from Washington State, from Nevada, from Arizona, from Georgia, all of these different, and of course, almost every state that I've named is a swing state. Oftentimes, these things are happening in swing counties of swing states. The Colorado Secretary of State said there's been a ballot fraud ring that has been caught, quote unquote, intercepting ballots, but the ones that have already been cast fraudulently are still going to count towards the final tally of the election. I mean, these things are already, there were the ballot boxes that were burning in Vancouver, Washington State, people that had already cast their ballots. This stuff is going to impact the outcome of the election. That's just the stuff that we're seeing, not the things that we haven't seen yet. Mark Elias is waging his lawfare, trying to, I think it's in Nevada, where if a mail-in ballot is delivered up to 3 days after the election without a postmark, it's still counted. Banana stuff, obviously unfair stuff. What do you see the state of election integrity being for the 2024 election?
It's hard because the other side has sharpened its lawfare knife to such a fine edge. And this 65 project thing is very nasty, where they personally went after all 65 attorneys who played a role in litigating election integrity lawsuits during the 2020 election cycle in order to sue them personally, to get them disbarred, to bankrupt them, to force them to mortgage their homes. And John Eastman got disbarred. Rudy Giuliani got disbarred. They've done this to Jeff Clark and 65 others. And so there's a question of how much lawyers are going to be willing to go to bat this time around, given what was done last time. But the nice thing is this time, there's actually a lot of high-level capital that's flowed into the Trump campaign that may be able to support legal funds for those lawyers. Elon Musk's entry into this, for example, is a game changer. He set up the America PAC. You have a suite of Silicon Valley investors, as you mentioned. Even Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg have sidelined the traditional money or political support that typically goes to the other side on this. And so there's a question about whether or not lawyers on the Trump side will be emboldened by the perception of a support network to allow them to litigate this. But there's also the open issue about what the Supreme Court will do about these cases. So last time, one of the secret weapons to all of it last time was the street paramilitary presence, the pervasive street paramilitary presence of BLM and Antifa and the Sunrise Movement and these climate core militias in order to threaten the country into total destabilization, shutdown of the federal highways, occupation of federal buildings, Molotov cocktails in police cars, burning down police precincts, surrounding the White House. There was a chilling anarcho tyranny that was on the tip of everyone's tongues as Election Day rolled around last time, and the threat of its overhang to come back on Inauguration Day, if Trump were inaugurated, I think made an impact on the perception of judges that if they made a pro-Trump ruling, the country could be set into chaos. Now, there's an unsubstantiated rumor, and I don't know if it's true, but that at the Supreme Court, that Chief Justice Roberts articulated something of that nature to Clarence Thomas in debating whether or not to grant cert to Donald Trump's appeal to have his election integrity cases heard by the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court denied cert 7-2, with basically two conservatives, but then wanting to hear the election integrity cases, but then two of the conservatives who Trump appointed actually declined cert. Kavanaugh and Barrett both declined cert to even hear the election integrity issues that Donald Trump's lawyers had prepared. There's an open question, given how brave the Supreme Court has been, I think, this time around. They knocked out affirmative action, Grutter versus Bollinger this year. That was a huge, bold move by them. They knocked out Roe v. Wade this year, the abortion law that had been in the law of the land for decades. It's quite possible that they, like Bezos, may actually be willing to hear these election integrity lawsuits, unlike last time, and actually give a venue to disputing them. We just saw, for example, the Supreme Court just crushed the Justice Department's attempt. Just this week, Virginia passed a law purging 1,500 self-confessed illegal immigrants non-citizen voters from the voter rolls. Merrick Garland's crooked Justice Department then intervened and forced the illegal voters to be put back on the rolls. But the Supreme Court heard the appeal from the state of Virginia and just shut the Justice Department down. If they do that this time, it could be a game changer from what we had last time.